Corporate Battlefield: Survival in the Rat Race. Chapter 1. Welcome to the Jungle. James Jimmy Mitchell had landed the opportunity of a lifetime. At least, that's how it had sounded when he received the offer letter from Cutting Edge Marketing. The year was 1987, and the New York corporate scene was in full swing. Power suits, shoulder pads, and fax machines ruled the day, and Jimmy was eager to make his mark. Fresh out of business school, he arrived at the company's Manhattan office with dreams of climbing the corporate ladder. However, his enthusiasm dimmed the moment he met his boss, Victor Steele. With his ice-cold demeanor, razor-sharp tongue, and relentless demands, he was a living nightmare wrapped in Armani. His reputation preceded him, and not in a good way. Jimmy's first day began with a humbling assignment: fetching Victor's dry cleaning. "It's a test," a veteran coworker whispered. "If you survive this week, you might stand a chance." By the end of his first day, Jimmy was exhausted, humiliated, and seriously considering quitting. But something about Victor's commanding presence and the bustling energy of the firm made him hesitate. Jimmy returned home to his tiny apartment that night, replaying the day in his mind. He couldn't believe how quickly his excitement had turned to despair. But instead of throwing in the towel, he resolved to prove himself. "No one gets to the top without some struggle," he muttered, staring at his reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. The next day, Jimmy arrived early, hoping to get ahead of Victor's demands. His efforts were met with a curt nod and a new pile of tasks, each more menial than the last. "Coffee black, 2 sugars," Victor barked, not even looking up from his desk. Jimmy gritted his teeth and complied. He reminded himself this was just a stepping stone, a means to an end. By the end of the first week, Jimmy realized he had underestimated the challenge. Victor's critiques were scathing, his expectations impossibly high. "Do you even know how to proofread, Mitchell?" Victor sneered during a client briefing. Jimmy flushed with embarrassment but kept his head down, determined to prove he belonged. But there were small victories too. When Jimmy managed to resolve a scheduling conflict for an important meeting without prompting, Victor's only response was a curt, "About time." It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep Jimmy going. He began to understand that in Victor's world, even the smallest acknowledgement was a win. Chapter 2. Baptism by Fire. Jimmy's first few weeks were a blur of impossible tasks. Victor expected perfection and berated him publicly when he fell short. Late nights and early mornings became his norm. He learned to navigate office politics, avoid Victor's wrath, and survive on caffeine and adrenaline. "Mitchell, do you even know the difference between Helvetica and Times New Roman?" Victor snapped during a team meeting. Jimmy flushed as snickers rippled through the room. "Fix it, now." Despite the chaos, Jimmy noticed something remarkable. Victor had an uncanny ability to spot trends and predict market shifts. His instincts were unmatched, and while his methods were ruthless, his results spoke volumes. Jimmy began to pay close attention to Victor's work habits, hoping to glean some insight into what made him so successful. One late night, as the office emptied out, Jimmy overheard Victor on a call. "We'll get it done. I don't care how long it takes," Victor growled into the phone. There was a pause, followed by a sharp laugh. "You hired us because we're the best. Let me prove it." He hung up and glanced at Jimmy, who was awkwardly pretending to focus on a stack of reports. "Mitchell, stop eavesdropping and finish the Zenith presentation." "Yes, Mr. Steele," Jimmy stammered. But as Victor walked away, Jimmy couldn't help but feel a flicker of admiration. The man was relentless, but he was also brilliant. Outside the office, Jimmy's life became increasingly isolated. His friends stopped calling after too many cancelled plans, and his family's concern grew with each passing day. "You're working yourself to death," his sister scolded during a rare phone call. "I'm just paying my dues," Jimmy replied, though he wasn't sure he believed it. Victor's sharp tongue and impossible standards became almost predictable. Jimmy learned to anticipate the storm before it hit, and he began to find satisfaction in small victories. A report submitted on time, a presentation that didn't earn a scathing critique, These moments were lifelines in the chaos. Chapter 3. Adapt or Fail. By the third month, Jimmy realized he had two choices: sink or swim. He began to emulate Victor's work ethic, paying meticulous attention to detail and anticipating his needs. He studied his strategies, learning what made him tick and what set him off. One morning, Jimmy handed Victor a draft report. "I corrected the figures from last quarter," he said, his voice steady despite Victor's intimidating glare. Victor scanned the report, then looked up. "It's about time you stopped being useless, Mitchell," he said, tossing the report onto the desk. It was the closest thing to a compliment Jimmy had received. Jimmy discovered that Victor's temper wasn't arbitrary, it was a calculated response to inefficiency. While it didn't make the tirades easier to endure, it helped Jimmy understand how to avoid them. Slowly but surely, he started to excel. To his surprise, Victor began to notice. He threw more complex tasks Jimmy's way, challenging him to think critically and act decisively. "You've got 5 minutes to sell me on this idea," Victor said one afternoon, leaning back in his chair. Jimmy took a deep breath and launched into his pitch, heart pounding. When he finished, Victor nodded. "Not bad. Now make it better." Outside of work, however, Jimmy's personal life continued to deteriorate. His girlfriend broke up with him, tired of playing second fiddle to his job. "You're becoming just like him," she said as she walked out the door. The comment stung, but Jimmy pushed it aside. Success required sacrifice, didn't it? Victor began to test Jimmy in new ways. He assigned him leadership of smaller projects, forcing him to manage teams and make critical decisions. "Mitchell, you screwed this up and it's your head," Victor said with a smirk. But Jimmy rose to the challenge, earning respect from his peers and even grudging approval from Victor. Chapter 4. The Turning Point. Victor assigned Jimmy the biggest project of his career, landing the Zenith Tech account. It was a task laced with challenges, impossible deadlines, and the weight of the company's reputation resting on Jimmy's shoulders. Jimmy dove in with relentless determination. He scoured market trends, conducted interviews, and crafted an innovative campaign strategy that would appeal directly to Zenith's leadership. Despite the late nights and the constant pressure, Jimmy felt a strange sense of exhilaration. For once, he was in his element. The day of the presentation arrived. Jimmy stood before a room of executives with Victor sitting in the back, arms crossed and expression unreadable. Jimmy delivered his pitch flawlessly, weaving in humor, hard data, and bold ideas. When he concluded, the room erupted into applause. Even Victor, who rarely showed emotion, gave a subtle nod of approval. "You did it," Victor said afterward, his voice unusually soft. "Good work, Mitchell." But the aftermath of the Zenith project wasn't as smooth as the applause suggested. The intense workload had left Jimmy physically and emotionally drained. "You look like hell," a coworker whispered one morning as Jimmy stumbled into the office with dark circles under his eyes. "How long are you going to let Steele do this to you?" Jimmy laughed it off, but the comment lingered. The price of victory was starting to feel too steep. While Victor praised Jimmy more frequently, his demands grew harsher. "Mitchell, this isn't about resting on your laurels," Victor barked during a late-night meeting. "You've proven yourself, but now I expect more." For the first time, Jimmy started to wonder if Victor's approval was worth the toll it was taking. He had climbed higher than he ever imagined, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing pieces of himself along the way. Chapter 5. A Taste of Power. The Zenith Tech account catapulted Jimmy into a new realm of responsibility. Victor began assigning him high-stakes projects with little oversight, expecting him to deliver results without excuses. "You know what I need," Victor said. "Make it happen." Jimmy thrived under the pressure, but the sacrifices mounted. His friendships faded, and his health began to deteriorate from the stress and long hours. Colleagues whispered about his meteoric rise, some in awe and others in envy. "You're turning into steel," one coworker remarked after Jimmy delivered a scathing critique during a team meeting. Jimmy laughed it off, but the comment lingered. Was he following Victor's path too closely? Victor, for his part, seemed to view Jimmy as an extension of himself. "Mitchell, you're not just a junior exec anymore," Victor said during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "You're my right hand. Act like it." The weight of Victor's expectations bore down on Jimmy. He found himself emulating Victor's ruthless approach, cutting corners and pushing his team to the brink. "You're better than this," a colleague told him one evening after a tense meeting. "Don't let him change you." One evening, Victor invited Jimmy to dinner. Over a lavish meal, Victor offered him a promotion, Director of Accounts. It was everything Jimmy had worked for, yet the offer felt hollow. "This job isn't for the faint of heart," Victor said. "You'll have to make sacrifices. But I think you're ready." Jimmy accepted, but the nagging sense of unease persisted. He was at the top of his game, yet he couldn't ignore the growing void inside him. Chapter 6: Breaking Free. After weeks of soul-searching, he realized he needed to reclaim his life. He handed Victor his resignation letter during a quiet moment in the office. Victor read it without expression. "You've come a long way," he said finally. "You're one of the best I've ever worked with. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The words, though uncharacteristic, struck a chord. Jimmy nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and relief. Victor leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "You're making the right choice, Mitchell," he said. "Just don't forget what you've learned here. It's a brutal world out there, and you've got the chops to survive it." Jimmy stepped out into the bustling Manhattan streets with a sense of freedom he hadn't felt in years. Cutting-edge marketing would go on without him, but he knew he had left his mark. As he walked toward his next chapter, he couldn't help but smile. Later that evening, he sat in a small cafe, jotting down notes for his future. No longer bound by Victor's shadow, Jimmy felt a surge of possibility. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was his to carve. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive. If you've enjoyed this story and would like to hear some more, do let us know in the comments below. And also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps us a lot. Thanks.